we're going to get started on a project now, and for this project all of the grade levels, 6th, 7th, and 8th, are going to use the same setup procedures. It's important that you find a piece of 12 by 18 paper, drawing paper, or some type of paper, poster board. It could be even a old grocery bag. It could be a piece of cardboard. But if you can get a piece of paper, that will be the best way. And if you can get that, and even if it's too big, you can cut it down to a 12 by 18 inch piece that you can draw on, okay? Or paper would be fine. If you cannot find that, then you're going to have to find some surface that you can actually put this on. So we need 12 by 18 inches in order to begin this. Okay, all grade levels. Now, what we're going to do after that, I'm going to remove this, and what I have here is a 12. So what I have here is my 12 by 18 inch piece of paper then that I have somehow acquired either by cutting down a larger piece of maybe wrapping paper or a grocery bag, or if you have drawing paper available, that would also work perfectly well. And what we have to do is grid this off into a series of 3-inch squares so that we have 24 squares. And so I'm simply have this taped down to my work surface. I'm going to take my ruler, and every 3 inches I'm going to make a mark. 3 and 6, and then at 9. And it looks like I need to move my ruler because it's longer, the paper is, than the surface of my ruler. So I'll go to 3 and 6 again. Now it's important that we do that at the top and the bottom of the drawing paper, otherwise our lines might not be straight. I'm going to purposely go back and bold these dots so that you are able to see the demonstration clearly. But my advice to you is that you should draw with a light touch. If you do any erasing, it's much easier that way. So we're going to go to the bottom of the paper again, and we're going to measure off 3 every 3 inches. 3, 6, 9, right there. Just move the ruler a bit and place it on the previous marking, and then our little registration markings will make it easier for us to draw lines when we're trying to connect all this together. We're going to do the same thing down the sides. So we're going to find our ruler. We're going to measure off at 3, we're going to measure off at 6, and we're going to measure off at 9. Now we know it's 3 inches to the bottom of this because it's a 12 by 18 inch piece of paper. We'll do the same thing over here. We need to probably do it this way. So we go at 3 again, and then again at 6, and then again at 9. Now everybody will ask me, Mr. Mathis, if I only have a 12-inch ruler and mine is only 10 inches in this case, how am I going to span this distance and connect these dots? Well, if that's the situation you are in, then we can simply go down the middle here and also connect those dots like this at 3 and 6, and then again at 9, and it should be easy enough for you to use a 12-inch ruler to span that distance. Now it just so happens I have a longer ruler here cut off of a yardstick that I use frequently, and so now we're just going to line those dots up and hold the ruler steady and carefully draw a line. Now I'm bolding my lines for the purposes of this demonstration. However, it's important that when you are drawing that you learn to have a light touch with the pencil. A very heavy touch makes it difficult to erase portions of the drawing, and erasing is a important part of making accurate drawings, and then of course other artwork such as paintings as well. So draw with a light touch. You can always darken it later. However, when you draw with a heavy hand, it makes it very difficult to correct anything or take out stuff that you simply do not like. Alright, now we're going to span this entire distance from dot to dot. However, if you had a shorter ruler, you would simply use the dots in the middle and just make 2 movements with it. Again, I'm looking here carefully, making sure that accuracy is important. Hold the ruler down firmly, and once again strike a line, a light line in your case, although I'm intentionally bolding this out. Okay, so one more time, we can find that, and we hold our ruler down firmly so it does not skid when we put pressure against it, And we should come out with 24 perfect 3-inch squares, numbering 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 across the top, and of course 4 down the side. If you have got that done, then you are ready to move on. So we'll get on with part 2 here some more. And if you were in my classroom at any time, you would have seen that we have a series of flags that are naval flags, or marine, meaning water flags, that used to be used on ships and still are to this day. And they use these flags to spell out messages. And these messages can be read by other mariners and naval officers. And so we base that project for the 6th graders on this series of symbols. And so we limit it to only 5 colors though. And so this is what you'll be referencing if you were in my class and you were doing this as a makeup project. I would have you look at this image, and then I would have you fill in a worksheet. So continuing with part 2, with the marine flag project and the messaging, we restrict the colors to red, yellow, blue, black, and white. And we would normally, if you were doing this as a makeup project, you would have a worksheet to fill in. If we were doing this physically together as a class, we would also use a worksheet, and we would color that in just as an exercise in learning which colors go where in this exercise. And down here, it's important to notice that only G, L, I, and Z have black in them. So normally I would direct you to go through here and to circle these particular letters, so that when you were filling in this worksheet, or you were doing the work on the project itself, that you would remember that although sometimes the colors may look very dark, especially when compared to a printed image such as this, the only flags that have black in them are G, L, I, and Z. Furthermore, that would also be these numbers as well, if you were to use the numbers, which sometimes we do. Now, if you are doing this as an e-learning project, then it's difficult to do the worksheet. However, if you were to do a screenshot of it, and I may put up a photograph of it as well, you could use that, color it in, and then use it as your reference instead of constantly having to look at this video when we are getting ready to make the actual project and which colors are going to go into which letter. Okay, we're continuing on with our setup and beginning what we're going to do for our project now for the 6th grade. And for the 6th grade, this will be All People Are Created Equal, which I think is a good lesson in the times we're in right now. Furthermore, this will be, if you ever make up a lesson or a project, if you for some reason are not able to attend school, or you are not able to you are perhaps out of school for whatever reason, then you can use this as a 6th grader as the project that you will use to make up for the work that you may have missed. Okay, so we are going to use the phrase, all people are created equal. We're going to reference our worksheet here for the shapes, and of course our marine alphabet down here for the colors that we will need eventually when we're done drawing this in. So because of the fact that we were able to put 24 perfect 3-inch squares on our paper during our setup, now it's possible for us to go and begin to spell out our message. It's important that you do it this way first so that you don't misspell it, and if you do misspell it and leave a word out or double a word up, it's very difficult to fix it without cutting it apart and using tape, and then it does just not look good anymore after that. So we're going to simply look at our phrase here, all people are created equal, and we're going to put one small letter in each box. Now you should draw these lightly, however I am bolding them simply for the purposes of this demonstration. There are no spaces between the letters, and there are no spaces between the words. P-E-O-P-L-E. It's important that you get this right, or you'll have to go back and do it all over again. Are created equal. R-E-A-T-E-D. Somewhere I think I went wrong. E-Q-U-A-L. Nope, it works out. Okay, but it's important that you get the setup work done right. It will save you a lot of, see, there I messed up. It will save you a lot of problems in the future. U, A, and L. And I've done this project many, many times. Alright, so we've got it all spelled out. All people are created equal. And that's going to be our message, whether you're making up the project or whether you are doing it as an e-lesson. So we look at our reference paper right here, shows us how to do these things, and it shows us pretty clearly that the letter A is split down the middle and has a notch in the side of it. Now we don't have to measure this if we don't want to, but you could, and each of these are 3 inches wide, so if you measured off 1.5 inches you would have perfectly in the middle. I believe it's possible simply to just estimate this accurately. So if we put a dot about halfway across our box there, then we can take our ruler, a straight edge, and we're going to orient it so it's straight up and down, parallel to the grid lines that we made earlier for the letter, and we're going to strike a line. Now if you do it lightly, you will be able to erase it should you make a mistake. I'm confident, however, as you can see, I still make mistakes. So as we come down this, there's a notch. See, I see this little notch cut in the flag there. It's a black triangle in this case. Come down about halfway, and then we go over here, oh, maybe a ½ an inch, or a couple centimeters, and we make a registration dot. And then we simply go from that dot to the corner, and we do the same thing from the dot to the lower corner. And this makes a very attractive marking that when we get ready to color it in, will give it very tight edges between the colors, and that's what makes it attractive. Now in the next case, since we are spelling out the message, all people are created equal, we have the letter L. And if we reference the letter L on our worksheet, it simply is split up and across, like a foursquare court, if you're familiar with that particular game. Now in this case, it probably is important to measure it off. So we use our ruler, and we measure to 1.5 inches, and we put a little registration dot there. Now I recommend measuring at the top as well. However, I'm confident that I can make a straight line parallel with this line right here if I'm careful. So I orient my ruler straight up and down, parallel, hold it down firmly, and I make my mark. Now, I believe that's pretty accurate. Now we can do the same thing by measuring downward. Each box is 3 inches if it's done right, and so at 1.5 inches we can put a marking right here. And then we simply have to then be able to make sure we parallel to the top of the paper, or even if you were drawing on the bottom of the ruler, simply parallel to one of the grid lines. We hold the ruler down firmly, strike a mark, and we've got our quadrants, our 4 quadrants that we need to make the letter L. Now many times, especially in this project and making drawings as well in general, you will notice that something that you do earlier allows you to reference it in the next portion of your drawing. In this case, we can do that. So we can take our ruler once again, lay it right on this line so it's parallel to the top of the paper, and we can continue to strike that mark into the next box since it's the same letter, and it will be more symmetrical this way and also visually more attractive in my opinion. If we measure off our 3 inches again, then we can go to 1.5, put a registration mark there, reorient our ruler straight up and down so it's parallel to the edge of the paper, and then strike a mark again. And what we've been able to do then is almost perfectly reproduce the same letter in this box, It will look symmetrical, it will be more visually attractive in the finished product. When we move on to the letter P, now the letter P, although this worksheet shows it as a rectangle, it is actually a square, much like the letter S. The letter S and P are the same shape, simply different colors. So letter P is a little bit more complex when we come to having to make the project. So we have to do some preparation work. So we're going to very lightly draw a line from the upper corner to the lower corner, very lightly so it can be erased later. We're going to do the same thing in reverse. Now this allows us to center a square up dead in the middle of another square. And that's important when we're doing design work because symmetry is part of the beauty of design work in many cases. Now we have some place that we can measure from. If we were to put a dot in the middle of this and done so that we can erase it, then we can simply take our ruler and measure off 1 inch in each direction. So we go from the dot and we put a little registration dot. We do the same again from the dot, little registration dot at 1 inch. We do the same thing in all directions. We measure off from the dot 1 inch, and we make another little mark on the line. And lastly, well, we'll just simply do it this way. We'll put the 1 on the dot this time, and we'll make our registration mark right there. Now we have 4 evenly spaced dots at 1 inch. We need to remember that because we will be doing the same thing for the letter S if we have to later, or if we repeat the letter P, we want them to be symmetrical. So we simply carefully connect our dots so we create a square in the middle of a square. Now sometimes you may find that it doesn't work out precisely the way you thought it did, so you'll have to just kind of fake it a bit. However, if it looks attractive, that's all that's really important, is that it's essentially a square inside of a square. Now let's see what we have created here. I think that will pass inspection. So we would simply go back at this point and erase out our layout work so that later on we can color it and it will not appear through our coloring. Okay, see, this will go quite quickly when you know what you're doing. However, for most students, we can only get through about 4 or 5 letters in the very first session, and then we run out of class time. So I think that this will be enough for this particular session if you are drawing along with me. Now, when you pick this back up again tomorrow, then we will begin continuing on about 4 or 5, sometimes with easy letters. We can get up to 6 letters each day done. It generally takes about 3 days to get through the entire message drawn out so it looks attractive and then matches the characters that are on the worksheet as well. And then we begin coloring it, and the coloring can take a while. Once this is all done, of course, it must be colored opaquely in order to make it attractive and colorful. So we'll stop for right at this moment, and we'll continue again here on the next portion of this. Okay, well, continuing on with our project for 6th grade here, we made good progress in the very first session of putting our letters down. Now we're moving on quite well here. And so let's continue on. This is usually a session where we can make pretty good progress. Remember, we're referencing the colors on our reference sheet and also the shapes that are on the worksheet that you would normally have colored in if you were in class. That is still an expectation that you color this worksheet in if you are simply making this project up from an actual physical class. For the rest of us on e-learning here, this will be something that you might want to do if you can get a screenshot of it, but otherwise we will work this through together. Okay, so as we move on, we notice that the letter E is simply really quite simple. It's simply one split mark halfway across horizontally. That's quite simple to do because we've already got a registration dot here and also at the letter L. So we can use our ruler in such a manner that we find that dot and it helps us level it out a little bit so it's nice and parallel to the top of the paper, and then we simply split that in half and the letter E is thus formed, and quite simply, I might add. So some letters are easier than others. The letter P is more complicated, but in this case we've got an easy letter again. This one here is the letter O, and as you can see it's simply a diagonal mark that goes from the upper left to the lower right corner. So once again, with our straight edge or ruler, we should orient our box from top left to lower right, hold it down firmly when you make marks so that it does not skid. So we've completed 2 letters in short order there. As we move on, we're back to our friend the letter P there. Now the letter P, once again, we have to do some preparation work in order to make this symmetrical and attractive. So again, as we did in the previous one in the first row, we orient our ruler from corner to corner, but we are going to draw lightly with our pencil this time because these are layout lines that help us draw better markings when we decide to bold them. The same thing from the other corner to the other corner. Now if you do recall, in the previous line up here, the row of letters, we measured 1 inch from the middle of the intersection of lines. And because we drew them lightly, they were easily erased. So again, we're going to measure off 1 inch from the middle. We're going to put a registration mark right here on that line. And I'm going to pronounce that, but you should just make it visible for yourself. And then again, we'll do the same thing in all of the directions of the letter. So we can reorient from the dot to the 1. Once again, we can do the same in this orientation as well. We put this 0 there. We've got a registration dot on this line. And lastly, sometimes we got to work in reverse. So we'll put a 1 on there and we'll simply mark it at the 0. Either way, 4 registration dots are still 1 inch from the middle of the square. And just like we did when we were back up here, we're going to simply connect the dots accurately. Now sometimes your math may not work out exactly perfectly. And if that's the case, sometimes you just have to take creative liberties with it so it still looks good. But in this case, I've noticed that the more that I practice with these, the better I get at it. So since this is the second one, I gotta say, it came out a little bit better than my first one in the first row. However, most people would never notice that, and so I'm not going to sweat it. Let's go ahead and erase again. And since we drew lightly, these erasures will be easily removed and will not show through our coloring. And then I usually use a little brush to dust this stuff off with so I don't smudge my drawings with the dirt on my hands. Okay, we're making good progress here. If we move on the letter L, well, we're back to where we can index again. Isn't it odd that these 3 letters are so close to each other? So we can simply lay our ruler on the previous line if it was a good marking, and we can draw a vertical line. And see, that splits it for us right there. And we're getting into some easier letters. If you can still see that little dot there, the indication of that dot in that letter P, you can put the corner of your ruler on that, and then we can simply draw. It's got to be parallel to the grid lines. That's important. Accuracy is important in these types of projects. So that looks about right. And so I strike in my letter again and my markings by indexing off of this dot and indexing off of this line up here. I have very symmetrical markings. Now that's really important when you have 3 letters that are right next to each other and they're all going to have the same color. So it is critical in some cases that letters that are near each other match each other easily or obviously. Now this one is a little bit easier. See, we can relate back to the letter E up here in the top row, and since it's one horizontal marking, and I think we indexed off the P last time, but in this case we can index off of the letter P and the letter L over here, and hold our ruler down firmly so it doesn't skid when you draw against it, pressure against it, and here we are, quite easily, the letter E drawn with little or no trouble. So we have repeated numerous of the letters already, and you will find many times that is what happens in some design projects. And that's okay. It still makes for a very attractive artwork, and that's got a message in it too. Now when we first started up here, we measured off 1.5 inches for our letter A. And we have the letter A here also, but we've also got an index mark left here right in the middle of letter P. We know that's right in the middle because that's where the intersection of the lines is. So we can index off of the letter P and orient our ruler so it's straight up and down, parallel to the grid lines, hold it down firmly, and strike our mark. So we've got the middle of the letter A done similar to the way we did it up here, and we can also use the letter E's marking to help us find the place for the notch where we want it to go. So we're simply going to lay it on this line, and we're going to look over here, and against this box we'll back up just a little bit, maybe about 1/2 inch, maybe a couple centimeters, and we'll place our registration dot like we did in the previous letter A. Reorient your ruler, and we'll go from the dot to the corner, and again from the dot to the lower corner. And we have almost precisely been able to duplicate what we see here and here by indexing off of this line and indexing off of this line. And so it's easier than a lot of people make it for themselves. This can be a complicated project, However, it doesn't have to be so complicated. However, some of the more complicated figures are coming up here soon. And one of them would be the letter R in this case. And so this will probably be the last letter that we can do for this particular session. We've been able to get through, it looks like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This will make 6 letters in one day. So when the messages have repeating letters, it goes faster. Sometimes you get almost every letter in the alphabet thrown into this, and then that makes it a little bit more complicated. So the letter R, if we reference our worksheet, is basically a large plus sign. Now on here it would be done in red and yellow, so when we color it in we'll reference that. So a large plus sign, we want it to be right in the middle of the square, and so we're going to simply measure off again. I know everybody says, why do we got to do measuring, Mr. Mathis? Well, it's part of making artwork. I'm sorry to tell you that. That's how it has to be. Now in this case though, we don't have to measure off. We can use the letter A to figure out where our marking will be over here. So what we've done is we've made a registration mark halfway across at 1.5 inches and a registration mark up the right side that levels out with this notch in the letter A. These markings must be done very lightly, very similar to the letter P, which we did earlier. So we're going to very lightly draw a line from the top to the bottom, parallel to the grid lines. The same thing is going to be done horizontally as well. So we're going to orient our ruler sidewards and lightly make our layout lines. Now these will be erased later, so it's important that we draw them lightly so that they can be erased. Now we're going to take our ruler and we're going to slide it off of that mark just a bit, that layout line. We're going to draw a slightly darker mark. We're going to do the same thing on the other side of our ruler. We find that, we scoot it over to the right just a bit until it's just about the right size. We have to eyeball it and estimate. Hold that ruler down firm and make a slightly darker mark. We do the same thing horizontally. We'll find our marking for our layout line, back it down until we just notice that we see 2 squares that are almost the same size, and we need to keep it level, and then we make another marking. And if we do something below a layout line, almost always. Well, okay, when we left off we were working on the letter R, which will probably be all we can get to for today, which has been very productive. And so where we were at was we looked at our layout line and we drew a line below it, and then we are going to do the exact same thing above it in this case. Now we look at this carefully, and what we notice is there's 4 squares, and that's nice, and if it makes one big square, that's even better. So we're going to hold our ruler down firmly, make it parallel to the layout line, strike a slightly darker line, and then in this case we can go ahead and we can erase all the stuff out of the middle, because we won't be needing that anymore for this letter. And we formed a very nice uniform letter R in this case, just by taking a couple of extra seconds to do some of the preparatory work, or the layout work is called, when you make design and you're attempting to make something that is symmetrical and defined sharply on its edges so that it can be colored in later with very tight control between the colors, which will help communicate your message better. And then I like to dust these things off, although you may need to just knock that off there with your hands. Okay, the letter R. Well done. And that's probably as far as we would be able to get in one day of sessions. So if we were to review, on the very first day when we did a lot of our layout work, we made it all the way to the letter P. And we'll just bold this line right here just to show our progress on this in one day. So that was the first day. And then the second day, which has been today, we were able to knock out all of these letters up to the letter R. And so that shows progress in one day. And that's usually, it takes about 3 class sessions in order for us to complete a message. So that would be all for this particular session. And we'll get back again and we will make progress again. Have a nice day.